Welcome to Widener Law Commonwealth. My name is Jill Family. I'm a professor here at the law school, as well as director of our Law and Government Institute. The Law and Government Institute at Widener is all about public service. We train lawyers in government law, and it is our pleasure to host this forum with the candidates for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for the program, Corinna Wilson, president of Wilson 500 Strategic Communications.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you to the Widener University Commonwealth School of Law. We also want to thank today PCN for covering this event live and welcome our viewers at home. The journalist panelists, starting to my right, is Brad Bumstead from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, Angela Columbus from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and John Misick from the Patriot News in Harrisburg. We have the five candidates here, and starting from my left, we have Joe Peters of Scranton, who is the former Executive Deputy Attorney General. We have Senator John Rafferty from the 44th Senatorial District from Montgomery, Berks, and Chester County. We have District Attorney John Morganelli from Northampton County. We have Montgomery County Commissioner Josh Shapiro, and we have District Attorney Stephen Zappala from Allegheny County as well. So before we get started, just a brief review of the rules. Each panelist will have an opening statement. They just drew the order of those statements and the order in which they'll answer the questions as well. We'll start with, it will be Mr. Morganelli, Mr. Peters, Mr. Rafferty, Mr. Shapiro, and Mr. Zappala. That's our order. For the closing statements, we will go in reverse order. Then we will turn to the journalists who will ask the questions. We'll start with Brad Bumstead, and each of our candidates will answer each question. They will have 60 seconds. Then they will have a 30-second rebuttal at the end. Once we're done, they'll have closing statements. Again, we'll go in the reverse order, starting with Mr. Zappala, and those will be 60-second statements. And with that, we will turn to the opening statement with Mr. Morganelli, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's great to be here with my fellow candidates for the Office of Attorney General. We are all seeking the Office of Attorney General, which is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I am, right now, Pennsylvania's longest-serving district attorney. I'm not the oldest DA in the state, but I'm the longest-serving DA at the present time. And the district attorney's job is a great training ground for this Office of Attorney General because as a DA, I'm the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for my county. In addition to being the DA for 24 years in Northampton County, I'm an active trial lawyer. I'm the only candidate of the Democratic candidates that has tried 25 first-degree murder cases to verdict, taking out off the street some of Pennsylvania's most dangerous criminals. I'm also the only candidate who has actually served as a special deputy attorney general, twice appointed, representing Northeast Pennsylvania up in Lackawanna and Luzerne counties. And I'm the only candidate for attorney general that has served all of Pennsylvania as president of the State DA's Association and as a 6-year member on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime, where I learned the system from top to bottom. My agenda as Attorney General will be very clear and simple. One is I want to address violent crime in our cities and take violent criminals off the streets so that our folks can be safe when they go out to dinner and walk down the streets of their neighborhood. Number two is I want to fix some of the broken parts of our criminal justice system to make it fairer for the mentally ill, the poor, and the drug dependent. And three, I want to give people a second chance. We've lost too many folks who can't get a job because of a low-level prior conviction. We need to have those cases expunged. As Attorney General, I'll get that done.
Mr. Peters.
Good afternoon, everyone. And to our viewers at home, I apologize for my voice and cold in advance. It's great to be here with you, and thank you to the League and to Widener for doing this. I ask you to remember that we are actually running in two primaries, Senator Rafferty and I on the Republican side. So in that regard, I ask you to sort of listen to us in comparison and in conjunction with each other. I put forth that I am the most qualified to do this job by credentials, by history, by career, and I believe that a person doesn't change his spots or her spots. What they are going into something really is testimony to what they have been, and is a very predictable analysis as to the kind of attorney general they would be based upon their background. And that is quickly this: a street cop. If you were building an attorney general, wouldn't you want to start with someone who's actually been on the ground in uniform and undercover? Then a chief of police, then a federal mafia prosecutor, and then having served 2 presidents on the poisons of the day, drugs and terror. And I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to go beyond that, and I'm going to use all the tools of the office, including the civil tools, to go after and protect those affecting the most helpless among us. Kids for cash, we remember that. We can do that with investigating grand juries. Custody for cash is something I'll talk about, is something that has come up. Penn State, let's look at what happened there and the second mile. Forgive me.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. This is a critical time for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have an Office of Attorney General that no one holds in high regard. In fact, most people don't even trust anymore because of the political agenda and personal vendettas. It's incumbent upon us to look at the best candidate, the electable candidate, who has integrity, who has a vision for that office, and who is able to redirect that office to bring back the professional responsibility and the integrity in the Office of Attorney General, to once again be the chief law enforcement official for the Commonwealth and the chief lawyer for the Commonwealth, and someone who has a broad-based experience managing a business, prosecuting cases for the Office of Attorney General Medicaid fraud section, civil practice of law, and 13 years as a senator of Pennsylvania working on significant and complex pieces of legislation, drawing together parties to make sure that the laws that we pass are benefiting the people of the Commonwealth, from Jessica's law to ignition interlock system, and one who is able to build the type of partnerships and relationships with the DAs going forward to join forces to fight the heroin epidemic here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and has the vision to go after and has had the legislation to go after those that abuse our elderly and our children, and to make sure that we bring all the resources to bear and once again instill the integrity and professionalism in the Office of Attorney General. Thank you.
Mr. Shapiro.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you to Widener and to the League of Women Voters. My name is Josh Shapiro, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today as we talked during the question and answers about the direction that we'd like to take the Office of Attorney General. Let me tell you a little bit about where I've been, because I think it colors the direction that I want to take this office into the future. I served for 7 years as a state representative here in Harrisburg. I'm the first Democratic County Commission chairman in the history of Montgomery County, or at least the last 150 years. I also serve as chairman of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. At each stage in my career, I have worked hard to make government work. I have worked hard to make sure we had an ethical, honest, open, and transparent government, and I've succeeded in each of those areas. I've also taken on the status quo. I've never been afraid to take on the big fights, and I've never been afraid to go out and be a fighter for the people that I serve. I have a really different vision for this office. You see, I think this office heretofore has been underutilized. I think this office can do so much more for the people of Pennsylvania. You see, I think this person should be the people's attorney general, the one person that every single Pennsylvanian can rely on, the one person that every Pennsylvanian can call on to protect their constitutional rights, to protect their liberties, to go out and make sure that our air is clean and our water is pure, to make sure every child has a thorough and efficient education system, and most importantly, to make sure our communities are safe. I've got the background to do this job and the vision to make it possible.
Mr. Zappala.
Thank you. Invariably, everywhere I go, people ask me about the integrity of the Office of the Attorney General. What I tell them is that's something that you have to demonstrate. I'm going to do as Attorney General what I've done as District Attorney for 18 years in Allegheny County. We're going to attack some of the areas that were, quite frankly, were envisioned when the Attorney General's Act was written and that office was created. We're going to attack public corruption, people that abuse the public trust. Unfortunately, I've had to indict and convict dozens of people in that regard in my county over my career. We're going to take illegal guns off the streets, and I would submit that no other office in Pennsylvania presently has taken more guns off the street than my office. We're going to use the grand juries that exist. There are 3 of them. I'm not sure why there are 3. There should be more probably. And we're going to attack violence, and we're going to attack that component of drug conspiracies that are ruining so many people's lives. We're also going to make sure conviction integrity is something everybody in law enforcement is talking about. And I want to make sure that every officer who is out there enforcing the law understands that when you arrest somebody for a crime they did not commit, that's a tragedy. If you convict somebody for a crime they didn't commit, that's a tragedy. And that should be something that's at the forefront of all training. In Allegheny County, by the way, the police charge about 45,000 criminal complaints in the course of a year. I only permit 16,000 of those go to indict formally charged. So we have a process in place where I do not let the police drive the system. We drive the system. That's going to happen all over Pennsylvania. We're going to invest in technology because I want cameras in police cars. We've minimized racial profiling in our county just by using technology and investing in science. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And before we get started with the journalist questions, I would be remiss if I didn't thank today's sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, Common Cause of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Women's Forum, and Widener University Commonwealth Law School. And with that, Mr. Bumstead.
Thank you.
And we ask Mr. Morganelli goes up first.
Okay. The top issue in this race seems to be prosecutorial experience. Yet in this very room, we heard Attorney General Kathleen Kane in 2012 say that she was running as a prosecutor, not a politician. I guess my question is, and she bases that on 7 years as an assistant district attorney in Lackawanna County. Where did that get us? And does it undermine the notion that the AG needs to be an experienced prosecutor when you consider that she is now a criminal defendant and has seen her law license suspended?
Well, first of all, that's a slogan. It was a political slogan that Ms. Kane used, like the prosecutor, not a politician. Quite frankly, her resume was very light. As you just pointed out, about 7 years as an assistant DA. I don't think that that's the best experience. I think the best experience is to be an elected district attorney where you're supervising an office of prosecutors. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. And as a DA, we're the chief law enforcement officers of our county. We supervise a large office of lawyers. In contrast, Mr. Shapiro has never been in law enforcement. He's never been a prosecutor. He's never been an assistant DA. He's never been a public defender. He has absolutely no experience at all in law enforcement at all, and not as a prosecutor. You need experience because you're supervising an office of prosecutors. And when the things work their way to the top, should we investigate someone? Should we, is this a probable cause that we have to arrest? You have to have experience. If you've never even seen a probable cause affidavit, as Mr. Shapiro has never seen, how do you make those decisions? So I think, yes, you need to be a prosecutor. That's the office that we're running for. And because someone has a bad experience, Ms. Kane, that doesn't mean it's not relevant.
Mr. Peters.
Brad, I think you've identified the core issue in this race. We are electing, the chief law enforcement officer. It's that way in the Commonwealth Attorneys Act. It's that way in the perception of the public. So we want the most experienced, and beyond being even a DA, with all due respect to DAs, because there are complex matters that are handled in the office, separate and apart from being a DA. Ms. Kane's, Attorney General Kane's experience was mentioned as 7 years. My opponent has even less experience. And that's, as a prosecutor, that's not a personal attack. It's an observation that we need the most experienced person who can walk into that office and lead it on day one.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. Brad, that was a good question. I think it's very important that we take a look at the Office of Attorney General. Certainly, they're chief law enforcement official for the Commonwealth. You're also the chief lawyer for the Commonwealth, requiring a broad-based knowledge of the practice of law. I spent 3.5 years as a prosecutor in the Office of Attorney General, Medicaid fraud cases, very complex cases using grand juries and working with the agents. And I've spent many years in the civil practice of law, doing administrative law, real estate law, business law, adoptions, those type of general practice areas of civil practice of law. The Office of Attorney General requires someone who is at the intersection of law and policy and understands the implications of the law, the broad knowledge of the law, and knows how to make policy and make legislative changes. I'm the only one here that can claim that, and going forward in the Office of Attorney General. I think it's important to have the criminal background. I think it's important to have even a broad background for Office of Attorney General.
Mr. Shapiro.
To view this office as just another DA or super DA or whatever the case may be, unfortunately and unnecessarily limits the scope of what this job is really all about. I think it was Mr. Peters who referenced the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, which defines this office very specifically and also really contemplates the three core divisions of the office: the criminal division, the civil division, and the public protection division. And the public protection division and the civil division are so unbelievably important, yet get very little attention and have received very little resources over time. Here in the Commonwealth, we're sort of used to just electing the last DA or another DA, and it hasn't worked for us. Look around the country. 40% of our nation's attorneys general weren't prosecutors, weren't DAs before they assumed office. And furthermore, look in this race at who has stood with each of us. More district attorneys have endorsed me in this election than my 2 DA opponents combined. That speaks volumes of how they view the office and the type of leader they think should be our next Attorney General.
Mr. Zappala.
Yeah, first of all, in terms of endorsements, that's just not accurate. But I practiced law for 12 years before I became district attorney I've been elected 5 times. As a practicing attorney, and if you're going to start a civil rights division within the office, which I intend to do, you have to understand what the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act can accomplish, especially when you utilize that type of authority with the Crimes Code and with the Judicial Code. As a district, I think you have to be a prosecutor. As district attorney, our forum is a courthouse. Our forum is the streets. The criteria we use is facts, and we use evidence. When that office was created in 1981, it was created to protect the interests of the people of Pennsylvania in issues that you can't stand up to as individuals. As district attorney, people who hold public office understand I have the willingness and I have the ability to hold you responsible, and I have on occasion. Corporations that abuse the public trust, you have the ability and you have the tools, certainly at the Attorney General's office, to take care of those types of issues too. So I do believe, Brad, I do believe you should be a prosecutor.
And now for the rebuttals, Mr. Morganelli.
Well, first of all, I would like to respond to Josh's comments about endorsements. His whole campaign is just a compilation of political endorsements. And the reason why is because he has no experience for this job. Being in charge of putting salt on the roadways and cutting grass at the county parks, as Mr. Zappala mentioned, is not the proper experience. That's what he does as a county commissioner, is not the proper experience to be the chief law enforcement officer of the state. And how does he manage Montgomery County? The old-fashioned way, raising taxes after the election. That's what he just did this last year after promising not to raise taxes.
Mr. Peters.
This office, and I'll keep coming back to it, is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth. How does one say that you don't need to be a prosecutor? And on top of that, wouldn't it be great to have a cop and to have a chief of police on top of that? So when others try and recreate or reinvent the office because they don't have the requisite skill set, or between my opponent and I, someone who's been a career politician versus a career cop and prosecutor, the reality is chief law enforcement officer.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. And as Chief Law Enforcement Officer, it's important to know all the aspects of criminal law. Actually, having written criminal laws that prosecutors today are using as parts of their tool belt to go after bad guys and locking them up. Additionally, I've been a member of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, and I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Sentencing Commission. So I have a broad-based knowledge of criminal law matters and civil law matters here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I think that's vitally important going forward. And I will say this. We've tried electing someone who just ran as just a prosecutor, couldn't manage the office, couldn't affect any of the other areas. We have to look at a broad-based background.
Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Powell talked about our forum. Our forum is not just a courtroom. Our forum is a drill rig that's polluting our drinking water in Pennsylvania. Our forum is a classroom where kids aren't getting their constitutional right to a thorough and efficient education system. Our forum is a senior home where seniors aren't being protected. Our forum is online where young kids our predators are going after them. Our forum is state government where someone needs to understand how it actually works. And our forum is defending a woman's right to choose and defending the LGBT community and protecting people's rights. That's what our forum is. Let's not view this narrowly. Let's view it the right way.
Mr. Zappala.
I guess if you really don't practice law or you've never been a prosecutor, you don't understand that the courthouse stands for justice. It stands for fairness. That's where that's where the most important things in this community takes place. And I've heard Mr. Shapiro talk about education. The Constitution guarantees a public school system. It doesn't guarantee the quality or level of education. The Attorney General doesn't have anything to do with it. Yeah, check Article 3, Section 14.
Thorough and efficient education clause in the state constitution.
Okay. So, Article 3, Section 14. But in any event, we have numerous administrative agencies. I'm sorry.
Angela Columbus.
DA Zappala, you just mentioned that the courthouse...
I'm sorry, Angela, we're going to start with Mr. Peters. We go in descent.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Well, Mr. Zappala just mentioned that the courthouse represents justice, yet we have heard over the last year and a half, over and over again from Pennsylvania Attorney General Kathleen Kane, that there is an entrenched old boys network within the judicial and within the law enforcement community. So I'm wondering, based on the evidence that has been made public so far, do you agree that such a network actually exists and has prevented access to justice, to equal justice?
I think ensuring equal justice is paramount for any attorney general across ethnicity, across demographics, across race, across sexual orientation. We need to be fair and even-handed. I think what happens is many times you have a DA who goes on to be a judge, and there's a certain camaraderie there. And in that, certain lines are crossed in terms of contact and friendship and collegiality. And I think a firm attorney general, and having worked within the U.S. Department of Justice guidelines as a special assistant U.S. attorney, I would implement and ensure those rigid lines of demarcation so that lawyers are not ex parte communicating with judges, and there doesn't develop a good old boys or a good old woman's network in any direction.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. I think it's vitally important that taking Attorney General's position that you instill professional responsibility in the office. And once again, in the programs and the ethics policies in that office, you'll make sure that there isn't that crossing of the line. Certainly within the legal community, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges all know one another. You're practicing in front of one another. I think it's the individual themselves that will make a determination as to how they're going to treat their responsibility and their friendships and their positions. There will be no crossing of the line or blurring of the line in the Office of Attorney General. We're going to make sure that they adhere to the policies, they don't do the ex parte communication, and they don't get into that familiarity state that breeds contempt or comfortability with one another. And I think that the Office of Attorney General has to be that high standard of professionalism in regard to the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Mr. Shapiro.
I think there is a lack of fairness in our justice system today. I talk about it everywhere I go. I think the system is rigged against certain people because of the color of their skin or the zip code they're from or who they love. Look, when you have a culture that allows Supreme Court justices and judges and deputy attorneys general and lawyers to swap homophobic, racist, misogynistic emails back and forth with one another, and it's okay, and some people call it locker room humor. It's not funny, and it shouldn't be tolerated. Job number one is to restore fairness and integrity to the Office of Attorney General. It starts by changing the culture. It starts by giving everybody confidence in the decisions that are made in our justice system. Whether they like the result or not, at least they know it can be built on a foundation of integrity, a foundation of fairness, and a foundation of justice. We need to do better in this Commonwealth. Every time we let a scandal like this infest our democracy, it undermines people's confidence in government, and when that occurs, we are all collectively worse off. I will improve that as Attorney General.
Angela, your issue is rooted in email problems, right? I mean, that's a question of leadership. In 18 years as district attorney, I've never had a problem with people misusing county assets. We've never had to discipline anybody, much less terminate them. We've never had issues about sexual harassment. Nobody's ever been accused of that. No complaints have ever been filed. Again, that's a question of leadership in watching your office and making sure that those things happen. I would take those emails, and they're not criminal matters. And I would take those and I would chip them off to the Judicial Conduct Board or to the Disciplinary Board and have those persons address the competency or capability of judges to be judges who are involved in this particular issue and attorneys to be attorneys. And I do think it's improper for prosecutors to communicate with judges by email or otherwise. Your job under my administration was you go in a courtroom, you get a particular result, and if you don't get that result, then you better explain that to the satisfaction of a supervisor, and then it goes up the chain.
Mr. Morganelli.
I don't think you can indict the entire criminal justice system, as Josh just did, because of a handful of wrongdoers. You know, every day police are out there on our streets, judges, prosecutors, parole folks doing their job, and they're doing it the correct way, and justice is served. There are times when we find some wrongdoers, and we saw what happened with the email scandal, and those people have to pay the consequences, and they are. We've lost 2 Supreme Court justices. Other folks have lost their jobs. There's now a big flashlight on it. It needs to go further. We need to have all the emails released so that all the public and press can see them. And we need to clean house in the Attorney General's office. I've advocated taking the top echelon out, We have too many Corbett holdovers. We have to get rid of the Kane folks. We don't know on whose side they're on and what they're doing there, and they're involved in these matters about grand jury leaks. I want to bring in a group of young, aggressive prosecutors all across Pennsylvania, a diverse group based on gender and ethnicity, and let's start fresh. And I think that having the confidence will be electing Pennsylvania's most experienced prosecutor, and that's me.
Rebuttal, starting with Mr. Peters.
John Morganelli is my friend, and I never thought I'd disagree with him on something, but he just said that we shouldn't indict the criminal justice system, nor should we indict the people in the Office of Attorney General at any level. And I don't know that you meant it that way, but rather than going in and sort of predetermining cleaning house with the upper echelon or the middle echelon. The sad part about this scandal, this chapter, has been this pall that has existed over the 800-plus employees of that office who, consumer protection, criminal, you name it, who do good work. We need to evaluate everyone separately, and I'll do that.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. I think that what's important to remember here, too, is a lot of times these decisions were made for political vendettas or personal aggrandizement, and I think that we take that out of the Office of Attorney General going forward. I pledge to stay 4 years if elected, 4 more years if re-elected. I'm not going to operate in a political spotlight or look for my next political job. I will be 8 years in the Attorney General's office, and that's going to ensure that someone's going to have their hands on the wheel of the ship of state to write that course and to make sure the professional responsibility and integrity is brought back to their office.
Mr. Shapiro.
I would very respectfully disagree with Steve's assertion. These emails that I think he said they're not criminal. We'll send it to Judicial Conduct Board. I haven't reviewed all the emails. First off, I would have made them all public. They may be criminal activity. There may be systemic criminal activity. There may be criminal activity by one individual. There may be ethical violations. I would package it up in those 3 buckets, deal with whatever systemic criminal violations there were, go after any individual who broke the law, and those who committed ethical violations, I'd refer that to the Ethics Commission. We got to be serious about changing the culture and be serious about going after those who were conducting themselves in this manner.
Mr. Zappala.
Well, it's true. I have not seen the evidence in connection with the emails. I've only know what I've read in the newspapers. We have no business. The Attorney General would have no business if this is not a criminal matter. Those matters should be handled by other agencies in the Commonwealth. You can't talk your way out of a scandal. You have to demonstrate that you're prepared to address it. I would address it quickly. And then once you take office, I would demonstrate that this nonsense will not be tolerated. Not just the emails, but the use of the grand jury or the misuse of the grand jury. And I think Mrs. Kane was in way over her head, unfortunately. To be a 4th, 5th level prosecutor in a district attorney's office is not being the district attorney. They're very, very different offices.
Mr. Morganelli.
I don't think there's much more we can say, but I will say this. I don't know how, Josh, you can evaluate a criminal matter when you've never handled a criminal matter. If you've never handled a criminal case, you've never been a public defender, you've never been a prosecutor. You know, if you make these judgments at the top and they do rise to the top, you have to have some experience doing this stuff. And as I said before, salting the streets and cutting the grass at the county parks is not the experience to be Attorney General.
John Misick, the next question is yours, and we'll start with Mr. Rafferty.
Okay. Actually, Senator Rafferty just answered this question, but I'll put it out there anyway for those remaining at the table. The Attorney General's Association of Attorneys General are sometimes referred to as aspiring governors associations. Though I can't put any of you under oath, I would like to ask you if you promise here and now, as Senator Rafferty has, to serve out the full 4 years of your term, or 8 if you're blessed or cursed with re-election.
I get the first shot.
Let's start with Mr. Rafferty.
Yes,
please.
sure. I stated in June when I announced for the Office of Attorney General that it was my intention to stay the first 4 years if elected, the second 4 years if re-elected. I am not looking to be governor, U.S. senator, or congressman. I'm looking to stay there to be the people's attorney and the chief law enforcement official for this Commonwealth. It's an integral part of the government of this Commonwealth, and important that someone isn't there making decisions based on a political poll or personal vendettas. So I've made that commitment that I will stay there for the 8 years, and I will be the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania during that time, doing what's right and not having to rely on worrying about, am I making the right decision for the next office? I will be there. Thank you, John.
Mr. Shapiro.
Yes, of course. I want this job, and I want to do it for all 4 years, and hopefully the people of Pennsylvania will bless me with another 4 after that. Look, I have specifically sought this job because I think this is the most powerful, most important, and most significant job in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You have the opportunity to be the one person who's everyone's voice in the Commonwealth, the one person who can defend people's religious liberties, their civil liberties, their personal rights, the one person who can go out and hold the powerful accountable, the one person who can go out and make our communities safer. This is an awesome responsibility and an incredibly important job, and it's the one job that I want to run for, and it's the one job I hope I earn, and I will certainly pledge to serve all 4 years.
Mr. Zappala.
I'm only running to be Attorney General. The Attorney General's office was created in 1981 to address, to a large extent, the corruption that came out of the Shap administration. That legislation made it clear that you represent the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You have no other interest. So, just as an individual, you go hire a lawyer. That lawyer represents your interest and nobody else's. I've seen a succession of attorneys general. They have a political, they had a personal agenda. That's not a criticism. That's just they were permitted to do that. But when you represent more than one interest, then you're not representing the people of the Commonwealth the way the Act envisions, and certainly you're not going to be able to accomplish things that you set out, at least from these types of forums. I'm going to tell the department, the Secretary of DEP, I'm going to tell him, look, your agenda is no longer a political agenda set by the government, it's the people's agenda, and you're not going to pollute the environment. People are concerned about that. Or I'm going to tell the Secretary of Health that you failed this Commonwealth because you have not provided adequate beds and adequate civil remedies for persons who are mentally ill. And you're going to do something about that, or I will. And I'm going to tell the legislature that this pay-to-play mentality, that's wrong, and we're going to do something about that, too.
Mr. Morganelli.
John, I've been elected 7 times as Northampton County DA, and I've ran for this office a few times. You think my wife's going to let me run for something else if I get elected for this job? No way. That's not going to happen. So, I've been a career prosecutor. It's what I do every day, being the chief law enforcement officer of the county. And the Attorney General's office is an extension of what we do. And yes, it is broader, but I also have the civil law experience. In addition to being a criminal trial lawyer, I've tried many civil cases over the years in private practice. I represented municipalities. I represented the average folks. I represented a labor union. And that's really the qualifications you need to be Attorney General, both civil and criminal trial experience and being a lawyer, and that's what I've done for 35 years as a lawyer. But I guarantee you, Mrs. Morganelli, not letting me run for anything after this.
Mr. Peters.
Well, I'm not messing with Mrs. Morganelli either. Josh mentioned that this office is the most powerful, and that's attractive to him. I'm not interested in the power in it. I'm interested in the justice that it can seek and the truth that it can tell. And we've already seen that the transition from governor, or Attorney General Corbett to governor doesn't always work. I don't believe the transition from a senator to Attorney General works. I was built for this office. I've worked with every single part of it beyond the criminal, the public protection section, the charitable trust section, where we can do so much in ensuring that fiduciaries, whether it's the Second Mile or the August Wilson Museum in Pittsburgh or the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia or healthcare mergers, we can affect every Pennsylvanian. I know it. I've lived it for 17 years from the bottom up, and I'll do it to the best of my ability.
Beginning with Mr. Rafferty, the rebuttals.
Thank you. One name, Mike Fisher. Mike Fisher was Attorney General in this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who went from the Senate of Pennsylvania to the Office of Attorney General. Highly respected, highly regarded, today a Third Circuit Court of Appeals judge. So that's a bogus claim. Attorney Generals can be a senator, can be a prosecutor, can be a civil lawyer, as long as you have the ethical drive and the integrity in that office. Furthermore, I suggest that everybody at this table read the Commonwealth Attorneys Act and stop saying things that are not part of that act that you're going to do for people.
Mr. Shapiro.
There's a lot of talk in government, right? Talk about how we're going to make communities safer and get illegal guns off our street. Talk about how we're going to take on the frackers. Talk about how we're going to protect a woman's right to choose. Talk about how we're going to expand hate crimes legislation to protect our LGBT brothers and sisters. Yet very little happens in government. The power, Mr. Peters, I was referring to, and the comments I made at the beginning, or in the initial answer here, is that in the Office of Attorney General, you can effectuate change on a daily, if not hourly basis. You have the ability to go out and be a fighter for each and every Pennsylvanian. You have the ability to go out and make a difference. And that's what I want to do.
The Office of the Attorney General has 30 different statutes that give it both civil and criminal authority. As Joe said, it could affect everybody's life on a regular basis, and it should affect everybody's life on a regular basis. Mike Fisher, by the way, ran as a prosecutor. He was a member of the U.S. Senate when he was elected, but he ran as a prosecutor. He was an assistant district attorney in Allegheny County, and he was elected on that, primarily on that basis. They ran campaigns saying that he was a prosecutor. Quite frankly, if you are in a position as a district attorney or a prosecutor, then you've had the ability to tell the people in your jurisdiction. I have 1.3 million people that I represent
You're out of
every
time,
day,
Mr.
and I'm out of
Zappala. Mr. Morganelli.
I think you have to focus on the core mission of the job that we're running for, and we can't just reinvent it and wish it was something else, and sometimes Josh tends to want to do that. It's the chief law enforcement officer of the state, and it has jobs of protecting the public, consumer protection, child predators unit, the drug enforcement, public corruption, running grand juries. That's what I do every day as a district attorney of Northampton County, and that's what I'll do as Attorney General, the core mission of the office that I'm running for.
Mr. Peters.
There are other things that can be done, but the core is the core. The top cop, the top prosecutor. One agenda that I've put forward, actually, the one person that I would hire new, and I'll find the money internally to do it, would be a veterans advocate. Because our veterans are not being served. They're dying every day of suicide. They're suffering from PTSD. They have separation issues with family. They have paycheck protection issues. There's no one filling the gaps and working with the rest of government to help them. And I'll do the same for farmers, and I'll tell you later how to do that.
And with that, we turn to Brad Bumstead from the Tribune Review for your question, beginning with Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you. Mr. Shapiro, have you asked for or accepted campaign contributions from people or industries that the Attorney General's office has sued or is suing or would be suing? I mean, are there any people that might have contracts with the office? Do you have any conflicts of interest based on the money you've received vis-a-vis the Attorney General's office, should you be elected?
I'm sorry, Brad. Did you finish your question? I didn't mean to
Yes.
speak over you. I do not believe that I do. If there's some donor in particular you want to ask me about, I'm happy to answer that. Every single donation that I receive, we post online as we're required to do under state law. By the way, I've put forth a suggestion that we should have almost immediate disclosure of campaign donations in this Commonwealth. Not something that the Attorney General can do, but something I would use the bully pulpit for. We need to have greater openness and transparency in our campaign finance system. Part of what I've done as County Commission Chairman in Montgomery County is create greater openness and transparency in our procurement process, to have competitive bids, competitive RFP process, required disclosures if someone is competing for work, if they've given a donation historically to someone in the county. I think those kinds of reforms are critical and necessary, and where I can do those reforms as Attorney General internally, I will. Others I will call for as Attorney General.
Mr. Zappala.
Thank you. Brad, the short answer to that is no. I'm not very good at fundraising. In fact, for the last 16 years, I've run without an opponent, so I really haven't engaged in fundraising. But I do think your question touches a number of things, and I briefly referred to pay-to-play. It was troubling to me when I read the indictment out of the Turnpike grand jury, because they started to explore pay-to-play. And my sense is the legislature will not act on campaign finance reform. So I think that's an issue that we need to take up as the Attorney General and take it up quickly. Also, John Contino was the executive director of the Ethics Commission for 30 years, probably the most respected guy in Pennsylvania in terms of ethics and compliance with that act. He's in the process of writing a letter to the editors of the newspapers across Pennsylvania talking about my administration and how the office has handled issues which touch or concern ethics.
Mr. Morganelli.
Well, I don't think that I have any conflicts of interest with any donors that would do business with the Attorney General's office, but I do think that a relevant issue in this campaign is listening to Josh's answer about conflicts. I mean, he sits down in Montgomery County and takes thousands and thousands of dollars from people who do business with Montgomery County. Now, I've outlined 8 companies. Either right before the vote or right after the vote, Josh Shapiro awards $1 million contract. They dump $5,000 into his campaign account. That's not transparency. That's not good government. In addition, his law firm, Stradley Ronan, represents some of these clients, Pico Energy, Exelon. Does Josh disclose it at the meetings of the boards of commissioners that they're his clients, his law firm's clients? No. He awards them $1 million contract. So I don't like to be lectured on ethics and good government by Josh Shapiro when he's down there exactly the opposite of good government in Montgomery County.
Mr. Peters.
The answer, Brad, is no, but let me illuminate, if I may, why your question is so important. The Inquirer has been doing some very good investigative reporting in Philadelphia in a case involving IBEW's union boss, Johnny Dock, and an alleged assault that's been happening. And apparently, a woman who in a senior position was not terminated but demoted because she approved charges, how dare she, against a union boss in Philadelphia. Well, the DA in Philly, because he had taken contributions, couldn't handle the case, so he kicks it to the Attorney General. Attorney General Kaine couldn't take it by her own admission because she had taken Johnny Dock, IBEW union contributions. Now they're looking for someone who can handle it. My opponent has taken IBEW, Johnny Dock union contributions. So if he were the Attorney General, how would he handle it? That's the difference between spending a career in politics and spending a career as a career prosecutor.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. My finance reports are online. I voted for everything in the Senate of Pennsylvania has come through to include an open transparency in the Senate of Pennsylvania. My opponent seems to forget that he took union money when he was a statewide office seeker back a few years ago when he got his teeth kicked in running an election. I'm sure that if he had the opportunity, if people came along, he'd be accepting campaign contributions as well. I was a member of the Senate of Pennsylvania when I ran for my last re-elect. A number of the building and trades contributed to me because of the transportation bill. But most importantly, I do not allow that money to influence any of my decisions as a senator, and I won't do so as a prosecutor for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's just bogus assertion, and it's something that has been, I think, apparent with some people in Pennsylvania, but not me as a senator, not me as a prosecutor. Thank you.
Rebuttals beginning with Mr. Shapiro.
I hope it's not lost on anyone here or anybody watching at home that anytime someone asks Mr. Morganelli about his qualifications or his views, he spews nonsense about me. Here's the facts. When I was in the State House, I was one of the leaders on ethics and integrity. I co-chaired the Speaker's Commission on Legislative Reform. When I took over Montgomery County's government, we put new procurement policies in place to make sure everything was above board, everything was on the record. We put an ethics policy in place that has become a model for other counties. I've led by example, I've walked the walk, and I've made a difference in making government more open, accountable, and transparent. I'm proud of my record, regardless of the nonsense that he says.
Mr. Zappala.
You know what? I don't have anything in rebuttal. Thank you.
Mr. Morganelli.
Josh says it's nonsense, but the fact is, Josh, you never addressed the point. You took money from companies that are your law firm's clients, Pico Energy, Exelon. You never addressed these issues. You go on to some speech, a lofty speech about your record in Harrisburg, but you fail to recognize that when you were in Harrisburg, you also voted and reversed your vote, a bill that would have banned members of the legislature to lobby. You voted in favor of that, and then you changed your vote because you knew that that would affect your position at Stradley-Ronan. So when I bring up a point, don't say it's nonsense. Address the point.
Pure
address
nonsense,
the point.
John.
Well, address it then, Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Peters.
Teeth kicked in. When you run statewide, and I note that I'm the only one who has run statewide, I don't win in a gerrymandered Republican district in suburban Philadelphia, which this glass could do. But to come within 6% makes a statement, number one. Number two, it is clear that my opponent is the gateway for big union boss money in Philadelphia going into the Republican Party. And number three, his own senator, Senator Wagner, said he's responsible for killing paycheck protection. I'll leave it there.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. And by the way, Senator Wagner gave me a $5,000 personal contribution to my campaign for the Office of Attorney General. Mr. Wagner recognized the fact that I did make a crucial vote on that issue. I was protecting the policemen and the firefighters, the guys who lay their lives on the line for us each day on that paycheck protection. Furthermore, there's a lot of people in Harrisburg who get more union money, vast more union money, than a rank-and-file state senator. And all you have to do is look at the articles that have been in the newspapers to show you that. I'm not the gateway. There's people there getting a lot more. This glass of water could certainly be in Joe Peters' seat.
You're out of time, Mr. Rafferty. Angela Columbus, a question for Mr. Zappala, and then down.
Thank you. Pennsylvania has seen a number of its laws struck down in the courts over the last several years. Just a few examples are the voter ID law and the gay marriage ban. And in fact, Attorney General Kaine refused to defend the gay marriage ban even before it was struck down because she believed it was unconstitutional. How much discretion do you think an Attorney General has in deciding which laws to defend? And is there a law or an issue that you personally feel you cannot or should not defend?
The Attorney General, like a district attorney, is a quasi-judicial office, and unless you have the facts and the arguments in front of you, it's probably inappropriate to comment on something. I do agree with Mrs. Kane in her handling of the Marriage Equality Act. I think the Attorney General does have discretion to act or not act in an area. There, clearly, the act was contrary to a federal judge's opinion in federal law and other aspects of the country. As to I'm really not familiar with the arguments that were made on the voting issue, so I'm sorry I can't respond to that.
Mr. Morganelli.
I agree that there are times, and I think there are very few, that perhaps an Attorney General will make a judgment, although they're obligated under the Act to defend the constitutionality of all statutes. If you're the Attorney General and you come to your own legal judgment that a statute passed is unconstitutional, I think under the oath that we all take as lawyers to defend the Constitution, you have some wiggle room to say, I can in good conscience enforce a law that I find to be discriminatory, whether it's on race or ethnicity or gender or whatever. And I think that Ms. Kane was right in what she did, and she was proven to be right, as it turned out. I don't think that this is going to happen very often. I think 99.9% of the time, close to 100%, the legislature is going to pass laws that are constitutional and there won't be an issue. But if there's a renegade legislature and a law is passed that the AG believes in his or her heart is unconstitutional, I would not enforce it, and I would act accordingly as Ms. Kane did.
Mr. Peters.
It's not, I'll have to disagree. The AG's job is not to determine constitutionality. You take an oath to defend the Constitution, and in the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, one of the specific responsibilities is to defend the constitutionality of Pennsylvania's statutes. Now, I may disagree, or I may feel it is unconstitutional, but it is not my prerogative. If you want to be the judge, go run for that office and get a black robe, or go be a legislator and change the law. That matter came out as it should have, but it's not the AG's determination of constitutionality. That's for the judicial and the legislative.
Mr. Rafferty.
You take an oath of office, and part of that oath of office, you uphold the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and you adhere to the office, the Commonwealth Attorneys Act. In the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, you are authorized to defend the statutes of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If they are duly enacted by the legislature, signed by the governor, it is your job as the Attorney General to defend those statutes when challenged. Only the courts, and the way our system of government is greatly set up with 3 equal branches of government, only the courts can decide the constitutionality and the unconstitutionality of a statute. Furthermore, the decision that was made by the Attorney General, there may have been cases in other states, but it had yet been decided in Pennsylvania, and the U.S. Supreme Court didn't weigh in until afterwards. So your job is to defend those statutes, and I will do so ardently as Attorney General.
Mr. Shapiro.
I strongly oppose voter ID, and I fought back against Doman. I'm proud of the fact that we in Montgomery County led the fight to depose both the voter ID law as well as stand up for marriage equality. The discretion that the Attorney General has under our statute is really, I think, the litmus test is hinged on constitutionality. It's not whether I agree or disagree with something, it's whether I think it to be constitutional. And to the, Angela, to your question about what I might or might not be willing to stand up and defend, which I think was the crux of what you asked, currently there is a lawsuit pending before the Supreme Court challenging the thorough and efficient clause of our state constitution relative to the education funding that Mr. Rafferty and others have put forth or failed to put forth for students across Pennsylvania. I believe the current system is discriminatory, our education system is. I believe our current education funding system is unconstitutional. I would not defend the status quo if I was Attorney General. Instead, I would join with those who were suing the Commonwealth and try and bring about a constitutional answer for the students of Pennsylvania that brings a thorough and efficient education funding stream for each and every child in Pennsylvania.
Well, now for the rebuttals, starting with Mr. Zappala.
I'm sorry?
The rebuttals to Angela's question, if you'd like it.
I'm sorry. Again, education polls highly, so it's good politics to talk about that. And again, the AG really has no business being involved in the educational process unless we're building a school or a stadium or something like that, and there's financing involved. There's a line of cases that addresses the discretion of the Attorney General. Clearly, when a statute is contrary to superior law, then you don't have an obligation to defend that. in part also, there's an office called the Office of General Counsel under the governor. That office still exists, and part of its responsibilities are to take up litigation when the Attorney General determines it's not appropriate for that office to be involved.
Mr. Morganelli.
Yeah, I just don't see how, as a lawyer, I could in good faith go into the courtroom and argue for a statute that I had my own legal judgment was unconstitutional. And I get the points made by Senator Rafferty and my friend Joe, and they're legitimate points. I think reasonable people can disagree on this. I think Kane was right if that was her legal judgment. She turned out to be right. Ultimately, the statute did have a defense, as Steve Zappala just mentioned, the Office of General Counsel, and so it was heard in court. I think this is just a matter of our individual view of what our wiggle room is, and under those, nobody's wrong or right. I see it. Thank you.
Mr. Peters.
When I took an oath to be a cop, my sergeant didn't say, you can enforce the laws you like and don't enforce the ones you think are unconstitutional or wrong. And there are going to be those circumstances where out of your heart, some other reason, you just can't move forward. Well, then ensure that your job gets done and ask a DA or appoint a DA especially, or an assistant U.S. attorney, or someone in the Office of General Counsel. We do it all the time. But it is not the prerogative of the Attorney General to determine constitutionality. That flies in the face of what our system does. You have discretion, but you don't have constitutional determinative authority.
Mr. Rafferty.
I stand by my earlier statement. That's a decision to made by the judiciary. We have 3 equal branches. It's your job as Attorney General to defend those statutes. I want to agree with Steve Zappala. Education is a hot-button issue in politics. Read the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, especially law students here. You're hearing a lot of exaggeration of what the Attorney General can do. The Attorney General has limited authority, and the Attorney General, under the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, defends the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania against lawsuits. Doesn't initiate, defends the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania against lawsuits. So make sure you adhere to that and listen to that as we go forward.
Mr. Shapiro.
John and Steve are just flat out wrong. The Attorney General does deserve to be and should be involved in the education in our Commonwealth. When the Constitution guarantees a thorough and efficient education system for each and every child, not some children, not just the children of John's legislative district or the neighborhood where Steve lives, but all children in Pennsylvania. We need an Attorney General that's going to defend every single constitutional right, including the right to a thorough and efficient education system. I take our state constitution very seriously, and I will defend it as Attorney General.
You meant John, right?
And now,
Not me, right?
Excuse me. I actually agreed with Morganelli on that last one. I don't know how that happened. I did mean Rafferty, and I apologize.
and with that, it's time for closing statements. Beginning with Mr. Zappala, you have a 60-second closing statement.
Believe it or not.
First of all, thank you for having us today, and thank you for televising this to the people of Pennsylvania. For 18 years, I've had the privilege of being district attorney, but for 12 years prior to that, I practiced law, and I practiced in areas which touch or concern what the Attorney General would do. I understand about nonprofit entities. I understand about antitrust. I understand about financings. I understand the role of the Attorney General. And quite frankly, it's not just set forth in the Attorney General's Act, but it's set forth in those other statutes. I've had a chance to study this, and I really admired what the state of New York did in terms of taking on financial institutions. And I promise you this, if I become the Attorney General, we'll establish a civil rights section in the office, and we will take up the areas about housing and public access and issues like mental health and issues about police use of deadly force. And those are important to the people of Pennsylvania. I've heard it over and over again. And quite frankly, too, every day in a large jurisdiction like the one I represent, you deal with discrimination and you deal with other issues that the Attorney General is better suited to address statewide.
Mr. Shapiro.
This race really comes down to 3 things. Number 1, who can restore integrity and fairness to our justice system? Number 2, who has the executive experience to lead a complex bureaucracy? And number 3, who's going to use this office as it was actually intended to be used for the betterment of all people here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? Listen, I'm very proud in this election to be endorsed, the only Attorney General candidate in the country to be endorsed by President Barack Obama. I'm proud to be endorsed by Senator Bob Casey and Governor Tom Wolf and many others across the Commonwealth, organizations like Planned Parenthood and our teachers and our nurses. But at the end of the day, I would be most grateful for your vote. I'd be most grateful for the confidence of the people of Pennsylvania, not just to elect Josh Shapiro, the next Attorney General, but to elect an Attorney General who will go out day in and day out and fight for your rights, fight for your values, and use this office as was actually intended to be used. I thank you very much for your time today.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you. I think it's important to adhere to the laws of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I will do that as Attorney General. As Attorney General, I will restore the integrity and the professional responsibility to the office. And I think it's important to note that when I announced my candidacy, the State Fraternal Order of Police, the State Troopers Association, the State Firefighters Association all stood with me and said, this is the man we trust. This is the man that we believe in to be Attorney General. Now, you hear that maybe I'm not the cop's choice. Well, my opponent has not been endorsed by his own home FOP, nor has any of the former Attorney Generals endorsed his candidacy. I have 14 DAs endorsing my candidacy for Attorney General, and I think as Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Chief Lawyer, they're important aspects of the position going forward, and I ask for your support. Thank you.
Mr. Peters.
Career politicians play the endorsement game. This is the year of the outsider who just wants to do the right thing. Look at the presidential races. I didn't ask my home FOP for my endorsement. I've been a member for 31 years. I know how the cops are voting. My opponent last year, before this race, went to the state leadership of the police unions, one of them I'm a member of, when there were no other candidates in the race, including this one, and asked their endorsement. They know he's going to vote on their legislation. When he doesn't win the primary, he's back as a senator, and they're stuck with him. The answer is this. I am the person who is ready to serve, ready to lead on day one. After the mafia conviction in Philadelphia, the Associated Press wrote a story calling my fellow prosecutors and I the modern-day untouchables. Now, that may be tongue-in-cheek, but there was a message there. They also wrote that we were fearless, looking for the truth, and incorruptible. I take that mantra. That's the kind of Attorney General I will be, a modern-day untouchable.
Mr. Morganelli.
This campaign is not about who has the most political endorsements by politicians who know nothing about the Office of Attorney General, nor is it about who raised the most money. What it's about is who has the experience, both criminal and civil law experience, to do this job. I'm a career prosecutor, 24 years. I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I've represented people in civil cases, civil lawsuits, unions. I sat with victims of crime over and over again. I personally prosecuted 25 first-degree murder cases to verdict, taking off the street some of Pennsylvania's most dangerous criminals. Neither of my worthy opponents here have ever tried a case in a courtroom. Neither of them have ever been in a courtroom sitting with the victims and actually bringing the case and having the burden of proving that case in court. I know that I can run this office, and I have an agenda. Let's protect our cities from violent crime. Let's fix the broken parts of our criminal justice system, making it fair for the mentally ill, the poor, and the drug dependent. And let's have a new law that gives low-level offenders a second chance. As Attorney General, I can get this done.
And with that, we conclude today's forum, and we want to thank our journalists, Brad Bumstead from the Tribune Review, Angela Columbus from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and John Mysick from the Harrisburg Patriot News. Really want to thank the audience for coming out today, and the audience at home as well for spending your lunch hour with us today. Thanks to PCN for putting us on TV live. That's very generous of them. We want to tell you about our next Pennsylvania Women's Forum on Monday, April 25th here at Widener on mass incarceration with Secretary John Wetzel and a lawyer from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And of course, April 26th, Tuesday, is primary day, and that will be the time when you can exercise your right to vote for one of these gentlemen up here. Thank you very much to the candidates for making time with us today. And thanks to our co-sponsors, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, Widener University Commonwealth School of Law, and the Pennsylvania Women's Forum. Thank you so much.